So Bridgerton is a thing. You know, that show on Netflix that is set in Regency-era England, which was overly obsessed with manners and decorum to the point of repression. You know the one, where all the characters are overly focused on showing outwardly good appearances in an attempt to convince each other and the public in general that they and everyone they know is not overwhelmingly obsessed with the fact that they want to bone. Normally, I'm a sucker for anything Regency related. If you subscribe, you might remember that I did a whole episode on Pride and Prejudice and the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which is still amazing, and you should go watch that episode and the show. I was hesitant about this show at first. I tend to like my period dramas to stick pretty close to what is actually going on. I watched the latest version of Emma from 2020, and I enjoyed myself, but it felt very Wes Anderson in its shooting and aesthetics. And that's cool, but I found myself wanting more of a traditional take on the story. This is a personal thing, because that movie was still great, but I will still be busy watching the BBC's 2008 Emma with Jonny Lee Miller. So I watched the first episode of Bridgerton, and I was laughing at how kind of dumb the show was. It presented itself like Gossip Girl, but in old and dumb wardrobe times, and was essentially just as soapy as you would expect. On top of that, everything about the show was over the top. It was hilariously flashy with dramatic flair, and everything reeked of present-day sensibilities despite the setting and time. So when the end of the first episode came around, I proceeded to binge the rest of the season! Somehow, Bridgerton managed to get its hooks into me. Even after the ridiculousness of the first episode, I wanted to watch more. Unironically, I might add. For the longest time, I couldn't tell if the show was good or if I just liked the cheesiness, and I think I've now come to the conclusion that the answer is both. Because despite all of my initial hesitancy, apprehension, and skepticism at the show's overdramatics and flair, those wound up being the things that made the show so good. Maybe even, dare I say, genius. Now, the show is truly fantastic, but I don't know if it was actually that smart. But my reading was this. Bridgerton uses its setting against the modern sensibilities of its music, its costume design, and spectacle, as well as its lack of comment on certain social issues, in a way that is purposefully in service of the show's surreal and surrealistic aesthetic, which in turn promotes the show's social commentary. Geez, that was a mouthful. And so today, I want to talk about Bridgerton. Originally a book series by American author Julie Pottinger under the pseudonym Julia Quinn, the first Bridgerton book was released in 2000. That's 2 years before the first Gossip Girl novel, by the way. And the final book in the series was published in 2013. The series consists of 9 books, and Quinn has released several second epilogues for some of them. She has a whole fuck ton of other books that also get high praise, and she is generally a really interesting person. So like, if you have some time to kill, the internet is your friend. Bridgerton, the show, was created by Chris Van Dusen, but produced by Shonda Rhimes. The show and Netflix take great pains to remind us of this any moment they can, but I guess why wouldn't they? Rhimes is the award-winning creator and producer behind Grey's Anatomy, Private Practice, and How to Get Away with Murder, so I would probably brag if she made a show for me too. In 2018, after signing a deal with Netflix, it was announced that Rhimes would produce Bridgerton through her production company, Shondaland. Consisting of 8 episodes, roughly an hour in length, in classic Netflix fashion, the show must have had a huge budget based on the costumes and spectacles and settings. Production began in 2019, and despite the show being set in London, was filmed all over England in order to find places that fit the opulence of the upper class, while still being era appropriate. The cast is exhaustingly huge, with the Bridgerton family alone having 9 children, all of whom are featured on the show with varying degrees of prominence, and that doesn't include their mother or the multitude of other families and figures that flesh out the town. Suffice to say that everyone has performances ranging from great to brilliant. After premiering on Netflix on December 25th, 2020, the show has now become the 5th most successful launch in Netflix history, and a second season is set to start filming in spring of 2021. I'll do my best to avoid spoiling anything, but for the sake of discussion, I might divulge something that might be spoilery in nature. The first season focuses on the eldest daughter and 4th child of the Bridgerton family, Daphne, as she debuts in her first season in London. This just means that she's now considered to be of marrying age, and her family has decided that she will be presented before the town as a woman with the express goal of grabbing the attention of the gentlemen of proper society so she can marry into a family that has money and rank, and a little bit of power wouldn't hurt either. At the same time, Simon Bassett has returned to London to complete some business after the death of his father, from whom he inherited the title of Duke of Hastings and a considerable amount of wealth and land, making him basically the most eligible bachelor in town. Unlucky for all those scheming young ladies and their mothers, he shows no interest in marrying or even taking part in any of the events of the season. Other families also have stakes for that season. The Featheringtons are a neighboring family with 3 girls of their own, all attempting to capture the attentions of gentlemen, which is only complicated by the arrival of Marina Thompson, a cousin who is also in need of guidance if she is to marry well. Plus, all of the other various exploits of the Bridgerton children who are male or too young to take part in that season. All of this and more is told to the audience through the eyes of an anonymous writer named Lady Whistledown. This is not just a narrative device, as her publications often break the news of scandal and secrets to the society, including those of the Queen. The identity of this mysterious lady is a question that is ever present throughout the show. She's also voiced by the venerable Julie Andrews, which is just awesome. It's Julie Andrews. It's time for a history lesson because this is all important and relevant. Without going into too much detail, the Regency era found England's aristocracy with a butt-zillion number of moneys and very little else to trouble them. As such, those who were wealthy were ridiculously, disproportionately wealthy and could employ large housekeeping staffs of cooks, maids, footmen, butlers, and more to do whatever they wanted them to, really. With all of this stupid amount of wealth, the aristocracy also found themselves with a fair amount of free time to get themselves into trouble, and holy shit were they good at it! At least according to the fictitious stories I've read. This period in time had greater expectations on manners and behavior in society, meaning things we think of as normal were terrible, socially suicidal maneuvers, especially to women who were not allowed to be alone in the company of other people without a chaperone. Talking to people you didn't know was considered impolite unless you were formally introduced, which only a man could do for a woman. Men and women were both expected to wear gloves all the time to avoid bare skin contact with one another, which would be scandalous as bare skin is far too intimate. Even something as mundane as a handshake would be seen as a blatant act of raw sexuality. Get your head out of the gutter, you lascivious monster. So Bridgerton is set in this strange upside-down world of manners and repression, except everything is all fucky. And I don't mean the people, although the people are pretty into that too. The first thing that hit me when I watched this show was how high the production value was in terms of how in-your-face everything is. The show is a feast both visually and sonically. This is all done to show just how absurdly wealthy the aristocracy at the time was, but this is taken to the next level in a few ways, and I'm going to start with the music, because this is my show and I love music. In order to be era accurate, the show focuses on instruments that would be common during the time. The Regency era fits nicely into the Romantic musical period, and if that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry about it. It basically means that composers were overly concerned with the passion and emotionality of music as a tool of expression. At this time, and later in the era, composers were exploring how far they could push the limits of musical skill, orchestration, and instrumentation. The most popular instruments were the pianoforte, a predecessor to the piano, and instruments found in the orchestra but played in various ensemble sizes. In order to stay in this style, series composer Chris Bowers employed these kinds of instruments and created musical ideas for situations and characters, such as the theme for Lady Whistledown. Furthermore, he made sure to incorporate pop sensibilities into the music of the show in order to not alienate those who might be unfamiliar with the musicality of the time. This is most evident in his work with the Vitamin String Quartet, who contributed covers of famous pop songs translated into classical string quartet style. If you're not paying attention to the music, you might even miss it. These play out in the scenes they're in so well and blend with the rest of the score amazingly. You don't even realize that you're subconsciously humming along until... Wait, is that Ariana Grande? Yes. Yes, it is. Along with songs from Billie Eilish and Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande's Thank You Next is featured in the show, and to great effect as the song underlines Daphne's enviable position of being able to choose which suitors she will indulge. Of course, this spits in the face of musical traditions of the time, but as the music is non-diegetic, or it's not in the universe of the story but accompanies the story when presented to the audience, it can probably be forgiven. You know what cannot be forgiven for spitting in the face of tradition? The costumes. Now, I will be the first to admit that I don't know a lot about costume design, and I certainly am no expert in what was historically accurate during the Regency era. I can tell you what an empire waistline looks like, and that dresses were long, and dudes wore cravat-looking things and white shirts, but beyond that, I'm not even a little bit versed in the fashions of the time. But what I can tell you is that they certainly didn't look like this. And I can say that because it doesn't take a professional to understand that the costumes are elaborate and over the top in a way that is obviously inaccurate. The everyday wear and elaborate dresses and get-ups of the time were already extremely ostentatious. Because of all that excessive wealth, the aristocracy was no longer concerned with practicality. They had people to do actual things for them. Instead, they could occupy themselves with fashion, and so they went all out on brash designs, accessories, and jewelry. Some of it was pretty excessive. I never got into feathers and clothing personally, but of course the goal was to catch a gentleman's eye. Bridgerton's costumes do all of these things, but then they take it a step further. The colors are bright and astounding. Things often feel like they're on Super Bloom or presented in hypercolor, or got stuck in the 80s. There is a marriage between the style of the time with a definitive twist towards the fashions of more modern looks. This works both for and against characters, as the Bridgertons are usually dressed well and glamorously in a classic way, while still having a flair of modernity, compared to the Featheringtons, whose dresses one might call interesting. This is due to their mother's questionable taste, but they're no less spectacular, and only furthers the different courtship tactics the show's characters use, but it is certainly not era appropriate or socially acceptable for the time.
My goodness, did you see her hem? She looked positively medieval.
The show's spectacles are quite modern as well, and I'm not talking about the stylistic choices of filmmaking. As I mentioned before, the most recent adaptation of Emma from director Autumn de Wilde uses a very particular directorial style in her approach to the story, and it's highly entertaining and creates its own kind of spectacle. Bridgerton 2 uses its own kind of cinematography to create spectacles, but within the show's own story, there are scenes that, well, they're absurd. There's a scene where fireworks are used for entertainment at a party. This is not out of the ordinary, as fireworks have been around for centuries, even in Europe. But the way the fireworks are presented seems pretty anachronistic. Even more so when those fireworks are then used to create what are essentially fairy lights over the garden party. In an attempt to create an explanation for this impossible, if romantic lighting phenomena that predates electrical lighting, this scene has drawn attention to the impossibility of such a feat. Even today, we do not have fireworks that would burn like that in an indefinite manner, and this is just one of the most bizarre spectacles of the show. Beyond the spectacle of events in the show, there is another visually striking feature that is showcased prominently, but in this instance, the show actually shows restraint for once. This is of course the inclusion of non-white people in the aristocracy, and most notably that the Duke of Hastings and his close friend Lady Danbury and the fucking Queen of England are all black. And the show makes little to no effort to talk about this. Apart from one scene where Lady Danbury explains that when the Queen married the King, things changed and they were accepted, there is little to no mention of race or racism. I've had a few people exclaim to me how they find it hard to believe that the show would place black characters so prominently and often with high rank and then not talk about how important it is that they can hold such a position. To which my response is, yeah, because it doesn't have to. Everything about this show is unbelievable. The show makes no mistakes in its attempts to create a truly spectacular world of intense and exciting stories and settings through its aesthetics. And so when it comes to the social commentary, it doesn't have to overtly say anything. Just look at this spectacular opening sequence. All the characters that are shown with any kind of prominence as both main characters and characters of aristocratic rank are all white. White people, white people, white people, but all of the activities that they're doing are to get ready to impress one person of the highest rank, and she is black. And the show does this purposefully. It's a total violation of expectations, and that's exactly the point. In the show, modern aesthetics are blended into this period drama and create a world that reflects the time but has purposefully crafted distortions. Bridgerton aesthetically is a kind of alternate dream world of the historical Regency era, and in this illogical logic, the truth of Bridgerton's genius is revealed in its surrealistic approach to everything it does, but particularly in its treatment of race and women. Surrealism was an artistic, social, and philosophical movement that gained prominence in Paris in the 1920s before spreading around the world. You're probably most familiar with surrealist art, and most particularly with the paintings of Salvatore Dali. This is a great place to start, as the surrealists were most concerned with using art to depict the imaginary and illusory realms of the unconscious and unlocking the mind through art. They were super influenced by Sigmund Freud, and they were probably high most of the time. The dreamlike quality they were chasing became known as surreality, and it's the same origin for the word surreal, which we often use to describe something that is dreamlike. The surreality of Dali's paintings was present in the way he used very realistic painting techniques to make something look lifelike, but the things that he painted were physically impossible or altogether imaginary. The surrealists were more concerned with what the subject of the painting was, an inversion of realistic techniques to create that subject. They rejected the academic or technical painting ideals of the day, and one of the reasons for this was juxtaposition. This is a fancy academic word, and if you're an art student like me, you might use this one a lot in essays, just to spice things up, but it's more than just a sentence enhancer when used in context with surrealism. Surrealism in Bridgerton is aimed at purposefully comparing the real world with the dream world that is created in the show with a kind of jarring effect. The jarring comparison is juxtaposition. Bridgerton is clearly surreal in its aesthetics, so we know it's not real. And yet, because of the nature of the surreality, the use of not just absurd qualities, but distinctly modern-day injections into the past, it is easy to compare the show with present day and the historical past. Because the music, costumes, and spectacles of the show have a modern sensibility creating a surreality, when black characters are introduced in high-ranking positions in the aristocracy, instead of saying, well, that isn't historically accurate, we're left with a juxtaposition, a forced comparison with the fact that racism was preventing people of African heritage from ever achieving this kind of rank or social class. And when they are depicted in this way, such as in Jane Austen's Sanditon, prejudice always follows. But in the dream of Bridgerton, of course they can do these kinds of things. And it's the absurdity of this fact when compared with the deliberate modernity of the show that makes us think, do we still have this kind of racism today? Even though we don't have the same amount of classism in terms of wealth disparity, are we not there yet? Can we ever get to that state like in the surreal world of Bridgerton? Furthermore, the surrealistically modern aesthetics of the show make it very easy for female characters to express liberal ideas more freely than they would have been allowed to at the time. As I've been alluding to, the show spends a lot of time on sex. And not just on the topic, but also in the runtime. There's a sex scene, and stairway sex, and bedroom sex, and bedroom eyes. The show, like the characters, is preoccupied with it. In the narrative, the show often points out the double standards between women and men in terms of their sexuality. Men are the keepers of sexual knowledge, and yet it is women that are supposed to guard it. They keep the standards of something they have no idea about. Daphne is a curious young woman who wants to know about sex, but the information is kept from her, not by any person, but by society. Her mother even struggles to explain to her what the concept is.
If it is this difficult to discuss, how difficult must it be to perform?
It is forbidden for young women to even think about such things because it's not proper. And yet, through the course of the show, the eldest Bridgerton's son admonishes himself for neglecting to bring one of his younger brothers to a brothel so he may become experienced. Now, whether or not this is historically accurate is actually not a question worth asking. Bridgerton is not concerned with whether or not these things actually happened, although they likely did, but with the expectations placed on men versus women. These expectations are placed within the context of the Regency era, but because it's a surrealist Regency era, we are once again forced to juxtapose these ideas with our own modern ideas. And of course, this is easily done. The same kind of expectations and double standards are present in today's society to the detriment of both men and women. This show oozes its own expressive and vibrant aesthetic in its music, costumes, and spectacle, in contrast with the apparent historical setting, and therefore creates a surrealistic viewing experience, which means the show doesn't need to expressly say anything about race or gender because of the juxtaposition with history, and can give far more leeway to the position of black characters and the thoughts of female characters. And that is why Bridgerton is actually super clever. And yet the show can still be super campy with its story, but damn if I didn't get hooked on the great character writing. I was unhappy with the way the first season ended and the implication of who Lady Whistledown might be, but I've been told that this might be a red herring, which is only made better by the announcement of a second season. Now I just have to resist going online and spoiling it for myself. Well, the internet is not my friend. Hey, thanks so much for watching that episode. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, and feel free to share it around like it's your favorite gossip pamphlet from one Lady Thistletwat. You can always catch more episodes of This Is a Thing, as well as some other awesome shows right here on Cinemaster's Ultimate Timeline.